to another episode of the Parmjeet and Pradeep Show. Parmjeet, how you doing, man?
I'm good, Pradeep. What's up at your end?
I'm doing pretty good. Thanks. So,
How are you?
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. Finish your thought.
No, I was just gonna say, we might as well jump into the topic here because it was a follow up on our previous conversation that we were having, and we were going to talk about hyper or over discipline in this episode. So, I want to get your thoughts on the topic and maybe ways to deal with it.
Yes, I think we talked about the value of discipline in the last episode. Excuse me. But anything when it is pushed to the extreme can be really unwholesome, and discipline is one of the example where if it is pushed to the extreme, it can begin to show its alternative side, that is the unwholesome side. Uh, so rigidity is like over rigidity is bad, over flexibility is bad, over discipline is bad, because it can have multiple consequences. It can have personal consequences to the individual who is overly disciplined because there's no margin for flexibility in that. So the enjoyment of what it comes in life goes down. There's no spontaneity. Forgive me for mispronouncing this. And then can have its own impact on family life, because a person who is overly disciplined will have no room for any deviation from his planned or her planned calendar. So means if something spontaneously shows up, something family requires, and they would not have much room for that. And even if they had, I think they would not be enjoying the process very much. um, and then that's the personal consequences, and the second is family consequences, and third would be more like a social consequences. And because they are disciplined to the extent they are, they would expect everyone to be disciplined, so that will have a negative consequences on their social interactions and social relationship. And even it would have negative consequences on their transactional relationship, which sometimes are happening in the business environment.
That's very interesting that you say that it can have consequences on three levels: at the individual level, family level, who those are you closest to you, and then a social level. And I saw that actually, Parmjeet, in a specific instance where when I was doing some operational training for business, I went over and I spent some time in Japan with learning directly from Toyota, Nissan, and Honda, and I was amazed at the amount of discipline that they have both at the personal level but also at the business level. Like their businesses, and this is one of the main reasons why Honda, for example, and especially Toyota really led the auto manufacturing industry because they were so disciplined in their approaches, and everything in their factory is timed, and it's incredible to see that amount of discipline. But from my understanding and being in Japan as well, you take a look at the trains, they leave like by on that second, right? There's no variation whatsoever. And as I got to know more and more about the culture, I didn't realize it, but Japan has a significant suicide rate because, from my understanding, is that people become so rigid and so overly disciplined that their life is just like clockwork, right? There's no flexibility in there, and the expectations are so high. And I can see that in their culture. So it's interesting that you see that because I see the culture of Japan being pretty amazing. They have a lot of great things that are happening, and they're leaders in their industries in a lot of ways. But there's also that flip side that a lot of us don't see.
Exactly. Means if I recall correctly, Toyota went out of commission at one point. The company was almost at the point of breakdown or breakup, and then they rebuilt themselves. And one of the mantra was discipline and quality control, and that is actually a testament to the positive side of discipline or over discipline. And then the second observation you made about the suicide rates and mental health issue, that's the dark side of discipline, especially hyper discipline. And I think it means beyond organizations, we can take that as example to the personal life. Individual who have no margin for flexibility would obviously suffer from that rigidity,
Hmm.
and can have multiple consequences down the line. And it always have a ripple effect. because once you become disciplined in one aspect of your life, you somehow automatically try to translate that discipline into the other part of life. Because it is a discipline, if we think about it, also a sense of control. You
Mhm.
can control all the involved element in the process, whether those elements are outside of you or whether those elements are inside of you. And control can be addictive in itself because it gives you that sanitized version of experience of reality where you are the boss and everything comes and goes at your bidding. So this is interesting, actually, both as much as we talk, as if we recall our conversation, that last time we were talking, discipline is necessary for us to do well in life. But this is still a question we all need to ask and self-reflect every day: to what extent we need to be disciplined,
Mhm.
and to what extent we need to have some sort of flexibility in our daily calendar, so that we have a room for all the spontaneous things happening or arriving or appearing in our life.
Yeah, very good point because it's how, but also in what circumstances and what situations. I've tried that approach with kids. It doesn't work. And trying to have overly, we were very disciplined as kids because our parents were very much like that. Again, having a military grandfather, my dad was in the police force in India and Punjab too, so he was very disciplined just in terms of his attire, how he looked, like it just how he carried himself. So I could see my tendencies and how I learned that from my family members. And I tried at, yeah, I would say I've been very good at it because I had to look at it from the other side. But with my kids in particular, I was saying, "Hey, look, we were disciplined as kids. You guys are crazy," and I tried to help them with the discipline. It didn't work, and but something went off in my head. It was like a light bulb that said they don't need to be disciplined because well, in certain aspects, I do, right? You shouldn't be at a restaurant. They shouldn't be throwing food around or stuff like that. There's certain social things that they should be following, but at home, they should be allowed to be kids as long as they're being safe. So I learned that the hard way as a father. And when we work with uh, entrepreneurs and executives, one of the things, and this is kind of how I live my life, is you got to pick and choose where you have discipline, as where you were talking about, because I believe, for example, our routine when it comes to diet and exercise, I pretty much exercise every single day, but my diet is very strict from Monday to Friday. So Monday to Friday, I eat super healthy, and then on the weekends, I get to eat whatever I want. So I've made that conscious decision to be strict from a timing perspective throughout the week, and then weekends allow myself the flexibility. And I think well, I know that works well for me, and I've seen it work well for others. And so, do you have any recommendations when it comes to how to pick or choose, or how to even make that distinction?
I think this is before we can answer that question, and I'm going to plug in my personal experience. And again, I will invite our viewers and listeners to think that some of the things we talk about here are stemming from our personal experience. It may not be directly translatable, but it is an invitation for you to actually test drive in your context and see what works. So for me, for example, in the dieting perspective, I usually don't follow any dieting process strictly, but I have a kind of a working, you can say, process that if you on the average eat healthy more than unhealthy, uh, within the margin of error, you are going to be okay in the long scheme of things.
Hmm.
So say for example, you uh, here and there you splurge on a bad food or do things, but usually you are actually a moderate eater. You eat well. You don't strictly control your diet. That will be okay, and that has worked very well. Means strict kind of a dieting process doesn't work for me. It comes from my own kind of experience. So I have used a kind of a loose process that at the end of the day, and in the non let me rephrase, at the end of the long term process, if you are more into health food or healthy food, and again, health food is different than healthy food, means eating wholesome food, uh, you will be okay. And also realizing that nature, the way nature works, it has not come up with the dieting process itself. Nature is very dynamic.
Mhm.
uh, so doing being close to the nature and eating what is natural, uh, and unaltered and very less artificial stuff, you will be okay. And that's what we have been at home, we have been doing it. And we, it may be worth actually noting here that we are vegetarians, uh, and for our both of kids, my wife did not take any supplements. Means she was monitored by physician, and
Mhm.
the only two things she took, one was folic acid at the beginning of pregnancy, which is recommended for all women when they're planning to get pregnant, and the second one is iron tablet at the, I think, third trimester, because that's when the iron level goes down even if you are meat eater. So one of the observation we had, that you can still have a kind of a wholesome vegetarian diet and still don't need to supplement with anything else. And that's what we often think, that eat better more and eat worse less, and in the long scheme of thing, if you make any mistakes and errors, that will be cancelled out. uh, that's what I have been our experience. Again, I would say that it could be different for everybody. You have to figure out what works for your body. This is what has worked for us. And would there be possibility that it could be done differently or better? I suspect so. um, could you pick up holes in the our process? Yes, you can, but we can reasonably say that it has worked so far for us. So that's pretty much my experience about this whole process, how to work with this asymmetric. So drawing inspiration from nature. Nature is not, it's not, it doesn't give us a kind of a calendar. It gives us guidelines. And if we
Mhm.
follow those guidelines, we will be okay.
Yeah, I think that's a really good philosophy to live by, is just the guidelines, because you're right. The way we've evolved, is through nature. And the only thing that was really predictive or predictable was the seasons. Outside of that, it's basically storms, droughts, you name it, a lot of unpredictability. So it's interesting that you say that we kind of evolved through the centuries. Well, so I said, through the hundreds of thousands of years, with unpredictability and spontaneity. So that's interesting that you say that. And we have become, I find, especially in Western society, Eastern society, it depends on where you go. We're going to Italy in May, and we're looking forward to that because it's going to be a little bit more relaxing. But even within Western society here, so let's just say Western society, I would say, is a little bit more timely, or has a little bit more of routine than Europe, for example, where people like to just hang out. They have afternoon naps, for example, kind of like what used to happen in India. And that whole common saying that Indians are never on time, but in Western culture, we very much value being on time. But even as said before, even within Canada, there's a difference between the West Coast and East Coast. If you live on the West Coast, it's a lot more chill. So that's the West Coast of Canada. I grew up on the West Coast of Canada, and even if you go down west of in the U.S., it's fairly chill as well, right? We talk about Californians, for example, or maybe that's just a coastal thing, because I think Florida people are pretty chill as well. But here in the Greater Toronto area, Greater Hamilton area, life is just like go 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 go, right? It's like you got to get up, you got to go to work, you come back, hanging out with friends and family. It's like you got to book them months in advance. It's really interesting, the lifestyle here, because I find the lifestyle here more, from a social perspective, more disciplined. Because in BC, we used to just pop by people's houses and just show up. Here, if you do that, people take offense to that.
It's actually interesting. I was thinking about your previous example of Toyota, or any disciplined context. I would say that we often mirror the cues from outside. So if we live in an industrialized context, which I suspect, when you went to Japan, that's the industrialized, that's the
Mhm.
centerpiece of that argument. And even in here in Toronto, Ontario is pretty industrialized. If you look at, means when I arrived here in late 90s, we drove around, and it seemed like to me a kind of a more brighter version of industrial area of Chandigarh, because
Mhm.
it's it's just better laid out, better roads, but it give me the same vibe. And I think the industrial context provide us the discipline. We pick cues. So people living on the beaches or in the park, they draw cues from the nature. And
Hmm.
nature is disciplined in its own way, but not in an industrial way.
Hmm.
Industrial industry is disciplined in an industrial way, and people living in that kind of a sphere would likely pick up those cues from their surroundings and then maybe unconsciously adapt to it. I suspect this argument can be translatable to almost every context, because people who live around beaches, natural parks, and all those things are more okay to people dropping by, because their lifestyle is not very rigid. They
Hmm.
have a lot of inbuilt flexibility. And then people who live in the industrial context, industrial society, industrialized society, they are less likely to be that flexible, so they do not broach people just barging into their home for social interactions.
Yeah, it's interesting you said that. As you were talking, something popped up for me, and it's having that built-in flexibility, because that's important. We teach a lot of people productivity and efficiency in the workforce, how to be efficient as an individual as well, because that's one of the biggest challenges I see in people. And so, yes, discipline is important. Being productive is important. Being efficient and effective is important because you have more impact. And if you can get an 8-hour day done in 4 hours, you can have that built-in flexibility after to spend more time with your family or do the things that you're interested in doing. And so that built-in flexibility is something that I think is really important. If you do things effectively, I think this is what I'm getting out of this conversation is if you're disciplined in the right areas, then you can have that built-in flexibility. And having too much discipline again can take things away from you, because when I see a lot of people be too disciplined, I see them not only struggle from a flexibility perspective, but I see them rigid as individuals. I see them emotionally rigid. Um, it goes
Yeah,
deeper.
it is actually, I think it's essentially becomes a control issue,
Mhm.
because as long as somebody is overly disciplined, they can control the factors outside of them and inside them, and thus can run the show they want. That may have, I think, short term upside to it, but then can have a long term downside to it. It may show up as a kind of breakdown or disconnect in family connections, social interactions, business relationships, or they may lose out on the life's joy of being flexible, of
Mhm.
being spontaneous, being available to creative spurts, because sometimes creativity usually doesn't show up between 9 and 5 jobs. They show up as a kind of a uninvited burst of um, moments. So having that kind of flexibility built in can be very helpful. Means yesterday we were talking in one of our classes, and I asked this question: so what kind of tree you want to be? A tree that um, grows tall, unbending, or a tree that grows reasonably tall but is flexible? Which one is going to withstand the adversity? And probably we want all our trees to be very tall, because I'm using it as a metaphor for productivity and prosperity. But usually those kind of trees, they fall apart when they're met by fierce winds and, you know storms.
Mhm.
The tree that survives adversity is the one which is reasonably tall but is also flexible, who can
Mhm.
bend when they're hit by that adverse event
Yep.
and then bounce back. I think we need that kind of discipline, where we can be disciplined where we need to be, but flexible where we are required to be.
A really good point, and I think that's a great way to close out the show is be disciplined where you need to be and be flexible where you need to be as well. So, thanks, Parmjeet. Any last words for the audience here?
No, thank you so much for the conversation. If you find this conversation useful, please share with your network. Subscribe to our channel. Please press the icon button. We would appreciate your help. If you would like us to do or cover a particular topic you are interested in, we will be happy to oblige. Until next time, thank you so much. Stay tuned.
Yeah, thank
Thank
you,
you, Pradeep.
Parmjeet. Yeah, thank you, Parmjeet, and thank you for watching. Take care.